Welcome to That Good Fight, a Reformation for Gentlemen. My name is Aaron Edwards. I'm joined by the great Nathan Paler. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. Yeah, I'm just looking at the decibel levels here on our little audio.
Oh, good.
Thing. I mean, we're very sorry for the audio problems that you guys must have suffered at our hands.
Hey, I don't know if they did, because actually the re-editing, maybe they
don't even
the better
know.
Version. Aaron. There's whoever knows, the very, very eager YouTube listeners who first listened to the echoey version that was uploaded incorrectly and persisted with it. But we still got good feedback for the episode. So funny. Not just sound feedback. Of course, we got negative
feedback.
There's
lots of feedback, audio feedback.
Whenever someone says, "How's the podcast going, guys?" we get loads of feedback. It's great. Really? Okay, good. We don't have a sound editor, that's why. And actually, do you know, that is actually a good prompt. That was an impromptu prompt.
Okay.
If that's such a thing, a paradoxical impromptu prompt, that we would be good at some point to cast our nets wide and ask people for support. So we will at some point set up a Patreon link, because we have growing issues of trying to find time to do the things that are necessary to keep the podcast going and to keep trying to galvanise people. And we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep trying to do it. But Nathan and I are not blessed, as you can well imagine. Not blessed with the technical skills to run the podcast in every respect. So if you have anything you want to contribute to that end, we'll try and set up a Patreon link at some point, and any other advice you may have, please send it our way. You can contact us on the usual fora, and there should be places online to find us. But
nice use of the plural there.
Yes, thank you. I thought, to keep the English language pure. Yeah. Just for our listeners across the Atlantic Ocean, in case they were tempted not to use the King's English correctly. Speaking of which, Kings, that won't necessarily be the segue, but we'll get to the King in a few moments. But this has obviously been, as we record this, has been a very tumultuous time in Great Britain for various reasons, with protests and rallies against the recent bills on moral issues, both linked to each other, with close proximity with one another. When we had the abortion up to birth amendment come through to the existing abortion law, which was passed with a huge majority, something like 75%, I think, in the House of Commons. And then the assisted dying bill, of course, the assisted suicide bill would be the more correct way to speak of that bill, happened just 2 days later, and I was there in London, part of a Christian Concern rally, speaking at it. Actually, I did write a speech for it, but we didn't have time. They had technical issues as well. There's a lot of technical issues, but they had more issues of switching location, and you weren't. I don't know if they were not allowed to do official speeches, but we were allowed to pray. So we had an amp system, and we had people praying. So I was praying alongside other Pentecostals and other people like that about this bill in advance. Funnily enough, I actually was in a debate with someone about. Someone introduced me to a very, very hardline cessationist pastor who was a post-Pentecostal, as many are, and he was just going for it, about how wrong it is for people to speak in tongues. And I'm not like a mad Pentecostal, but I would defend the reality of the gift of tongues as much as I would challenge the excesses of it in many Pentecostal traditions. So we were going at this debate. This guy was kind of quite prickly about it, and then I was pulled out, interrupted by Andrea Williams to ask to go and pray. So then I went to start leading the prayer. I was like, shall I go and speak? I don't know. So I prayed, and then the mic got passed to various other people to pray, including some a Pentecostal lady who got up, and she really went for it with the tongues. There were some tongues. Loud and clear, and I was like, I'm not sure if I defend everything in relation to this, but I did want to say that it was an interesting ecumenical venture of Christians uniting, despite differences in some of those particulars. So there's some hardline Reformed listeners to our podcast who'd be like, oh no, I can't even amen the prayers of a Pentecostal if they pray in tongues, because it would sort of sully their approach to worship, let's say, especially Presbyterians who have a high view, rightly, of the order of worship, etc. But I think when you're in these contexts, this is a whole other issue for us to talk about another time, of Christians uniting in common cause for Christ, especially on kingdom issues like this. So when we're talking about Christianity in this particular nation, and it's not just any nation, it's in this nation, and this nation which would call itself a Christian country and has been historically. So that was that was last week being taking up a lot of time and a lot of ink with people talking about this, isn't it?
It was a deathly week. It was awful. Those two different things. My understanding now, obviously, the euthanasia bill will go to the Lords now.
Yeah.
And we were having this conversation, weren't we, the other day about after the evening service at Watchorn Church, we were talking about this, about how the powers of the Lords have been significantly reduced over the last 100 plus years, but specifically 1911 was when they were really clipped. They used to have almost like an indefinite veto power. They don't have that now for obviously.
How often did they use that veto? Presumably
definitively. I wish I had that fact in my head.
It would be interesting to know.
It would be lovely to have in my head. Should we just ask ChatGPT and
come
to the death of Western civilization?
It would be a bit of a mean question. It's the kind of thing that James O'Brien on LBC would ask. You know,
he's a jerk.
He's such a snake, isn't he? Because you hear. I was talking to my neighbour about this the other day, saying what he does is, for those of you who just Google James O'Brien LBC.
It'll save yourself a lot of problems.
LBC News, but he's quite hugely influential on the liberal middle class so-called centre.
Yeah, the chattering classes, the dinner class, the dinner party class.
Yeah, who want to think that they're educated. So he comes across as extremely... No, he obviously is educated, but the way he'll usually get someone on to talk about immigration, and it'll be Joe from Rotherham. And Joe from Rotherham is really annoyed about the amount of immigration that's completely changed his city or something, or his area that he lives in, something like that. And he'll have strong opinions and passionate about it. So they want to get Joe from Rotherham on, but Joe from Rotherham doesn't necessarily know how to articulate facts under pressure. And so that's the kind of person they want. They want someone who offers the passionate right-wing opinion, and then for him to interrupt them halfway through their first impassioned speech and to say, so exactly how many have come
and if they don't know...
And they don't know.
If they don't know, then you must be an idiot.
Yeah, like the whole thing. There was a whole debate I saw about the kind of hotels. So, obviously, many people who are illegal immigrants to Britain are obviously put up in hotels. Now there is the headline of 5-star hotels. They've been put up in 5-star. That's exactly how many 5-star hotels he'll interrupt with. Well, I don't know. When was it last a 5-star hotel? Was it functioning as a 5-star hotel at the time? Well, I didn't. No, you didn't look. You didn't do your research.
Who worked the toilets?
Yeah.
Where do they live? How many dogs do they have?
Well, if you didn't even do your research, then why even have the opinion?
They want. It's midwittery. You heard that word? Midwittery. That notion of the IQ scale.
Yeah.
You've got people on the lower end and the people on the higher end, and they actually happen to have the same opinion.
Exactly.
So, like the idea of yes, it is wrong for us to put up illegal immigrants in 5-star hotels, and both the lower end and the higher end will think that. Someone in the middle will be like James O'Brien.
Yeah.
How many 5-star hotels?
Yeah.
How many are there? There aren't actually that many. And they miss the point spectacularly.
Exactly. And he was going even to the level of it's not a 5-star hotel unless it functions in that moment. Like, so, they're getting restricted meals, then it's not a 5-star hotel.
I can't listen to him. I honestly can't listen to him. I see a clip come up, I can't listen to him. So,
Yeah,
how do we get on to
the Lords? I was telling you that I was acting like a
James O'Brien
by saying exactly how many vetoes to the Lords offer. But it is interesting to know.
My educated guess will be that it will be relatively common because it was a common part of parliamentary process.
Yeah.
That the House of Commons would put forward a bill, and the House of Lords would be an integral organ of the state, vetoing, blocking, affirming. And there are reasons, of course, in terms of political science, there are reasons for arguing against that, of course, in terms of efficiency of parliament, efficiency of legislation, etc. But what we see here in this situation is many of us, certainly socially conservatives, are hoping that the House of Lords are going to do that which they could have done, but 100 and something years ago, not that long ago, not in the grand scheme of things, certainly not in the scheme of British history, and they could have stopped this. If we were living in 1910... and something as mad as this was put forward, the House of Lords could have stopped it. And they could have been the heroic last buffer.
Yeah.
Can't have that now. No. They can't veto forever. So what we are looking at here is the product of, this is almost pointless because it's so obvious. But we're looking at here the changed fabric of British society. Yeah. But it's not just that which appears at the surface. There's something else going on beneath the surface as well. The ideas that made this possible, the idea of individual bodily autonomy, the atomization of the individual, the idea that, let's say, with regards to euthanasia, that one's suffering belongs only to the individual and not to those around them, that their death belongs to them and not to those around them, that to cut the cord between the living that doesn't have consequences, that we can do this easily. You know, these are all ideas that have been made more prevalent in the last 50 or something years. And then again, in terms of the political machinations of the British state, this wouldn't have been possible even 100 years ago.
No.
So we need to, you know, many of us, I said this to you on Sunday, Aaron, many conservatives, like, what's his name now? I've lost. This is what happens to me when I come on this podcast. I lose my brain, so I can't actually think. What's his name? The guy who got the really famous historian, David Starkey. David Starkey, there it is.
The guy.
You know, do the thing. With the guy.
David
Starkey, yes, he will say, you know, one of the things, and in all fairness, Rupert Lowe as well.
Yeah.
Who did a really interesting interview with The Spectator recently, and he was saying, look, one of the first things a new government, my government, would do is to repeal. It needs to be, not to new legislation, it would be repealing legislation. And David Starkey's thing is to go back to Blair and repeal it. I would go back further. You know, we need to go back to possibly even into those early 1900s and start thinking about what kind of society do we want? Do we want an actual functioning House of Lords? This is how Peter Hitchens' point. He doesn't favour the abolition of the House of Lords, but in its current state, it's barely worth defending because it's hamstrung.
Yeah, and it's been, I guess, infested with fake lords, as it were,
absolutely,
added in, and and they're a product of the culture. That gets us to the question then of the state of Britain and the identity of Britain, the culture of Britain. If at one time we had, let's say, a predominant aristocracy, and then I don't know at what point the lords stopped being merely the aristocracy, which in and of itself, by the way, we've talked about this in our episode on being gentlemanian. What does it mean? What was the Christian English gentleman? How Christian were they, and what was good about them? Why are things like Downton Abbey or The Crown, as series on TV in recent years, why were they so popular? Because there's such a contrast, and there's something that people actually yearn for. It's why they go around a National Trust property and go, wow, this is wonderful, this kind of elitist way of living. They appreciate it, even though they would be the first to tear it down in the cultural Marxism that's swept across European culture of the last 200 or so years. That's part of the issue that we have. We have this weird paradox of wanting this society where there's nobility, where there's people who are bred in order to care about patriotism, in order to care about the state of the nation more broadly and take a wider vision. But of course, they're humans, they're sinful, they're corrupt. They are, at some point, without Christ, going to turn away. The heart is sick, desperately, and will seek its own end. So of course that happened with the aristocracy. So of course, in a way, people go, how could you possibly trust the House of Lords? But then you kind of get the same issue as the case of democracy, with Churchill's famous, democracy's the worst, apart from the rest. But it's like, can you trust the populace? Can you trust the current populace of Britain to make moral choices more so than a generation, or let's say, I don't even say a class, but you could, I guess you would say a class historically, who were trained with that sense of nobility, which meant, by de facto, it actually meant that you were not supposed to be self-seeking. The point of it is to care for the wider. Yes, of course you exactly. So that whole notion is sort of lost on it. And I think this is where you pointed to another series that had come on TV recently. Because I was saying some of these laws that have been passed, so many people in Britain are out of step with them. In fact, in a good way, there's people that it causes an outcry. So even while we were standing outside Parliament on last Friday, praying, and I'm praying fervently, of course. In tongues. Of course.
Literally behind that guy you had to debate with, just really aggressively.
Let me prove it to you. His argument, by the way, was that tongues have to have a grammar, like an official grammar and vocabulary that's fully recognised. I was like, I don't know where that rule is, like, in order for it to be seen as a language. Anyway, we'll go into that's a whole other debate. But as with their praying, of course I'm praying that the bill is defeated. But there's still a huge part of me that's thinking, my bigger prayer, really, my bigger thing I'm wanting is for the church to wake up. And thereby for the nation to wake up. Because it wouldn't quite make sense for the vote on Wednesday to come through and go, yes, we've decided to decriminalise abortion up to birth, which is just unbelievable. And then, but there's a slight moral fabric that we can sort of, agree that we won't, agree to euthanasia with all these conditions. Now, that was a much closer vote. I think it was 23 votes was the difference. And so it would make more sense providentially, not that we can guess providence, but to go that this is more likely to be a judgment. against the nation. And for the purpose, we hope, of rising people, rousing them to repentance, rousing them to realise, even the churches go, we've neglected God's word, we've neglected his law, and we've actually treated it foolishly, and we've kind of trusted our own hearts, we've gone our own ways, even as we've tried to tear down what we see as injustices previously in other generations. Those who've been most animated to say, oh, look how terrible it was when we had the aristocracy, for example, because you had people who were able to lord it over others and not take responsibility. Well, now we have exactly the same, but we just have it in a democratic level. People are lording it over the unborn. They're lording it over those who are vulnerable at the end of life as well. And so those are things that should not be representative of Britain as a nation. So there should be a rising up going, this is not us, this is not who we are, we didn't vote for these particular bills. So the people we voted for, we voted for these people, but it shows a massive flaw in democracy. There was a part of me that was going, wouldn't it I mean, it has to be guarded, of course, but with a pinch of salt, but wouldn't it be great if occasionally the king could just be the king? To just come in and go, no, that's not happening. This is Britain, and I believe in Britain. I thought the king the monarch surely, has to be the most patriotic person that there is, by rote. Like, how can you be the king of England and not be the most patriotic person that exists? Patriotic person, sorry, I shouldn't be saying it like an American. Be the most patriotic person that exists. And so if that's the case, couldn't he come along and go, I know I'm supposed to sign this. I know you could dissolve the monarchy if I go against the House of Commons, but I'm going to try it and see what happens. And then you said there is actually a moment in fiction.
There's a piece in fiction.
So please play it.
I'm going to play this. So,
what was the context up to?
So hang on 1 second. Let me find the actual... I need to credit the author properly, but it's called King Charles III.
It was a play, wasn't it?
It was a play, that's right, by Mike Bartlett.
Yeah.
It was first to play in 2014, and then it was released on British TV, or BBC Two, in May of 2017.
You just said British like an American.
British. Yeah,
British.
Talking, so
how do they say British in the Northeast, though?
I don't know.
You're no longer
Grunts and I don't know what the stereotype would be. No, I mean, it's probably true. I've had all afternoon of teaching history, funny enough, so my enunciation isn't quite correct. Anyway, so it was released on British television in 2017, and the setup is, look, this is maybe sort of inside baseball here, to use that American expression, but there was a whole hacking scandal here in the UK in the early 2010s, late 2000s, and it was all about particular tabloids, Piers Morgan's, not least amongst them, News of the World, recording people without their permission, and this is the premise, or this is part of the premise for the play. It's not really that important how it gets to this point, but all you need to know is that this is before the Queen had actually died in history. The Queen has died, and King Charles III has stood up against the House of Commons, who are increasingly taking more and more power from the monarchy and is increasingly hostile. You've got this Prime Minister who isn't quite obvious whether or not he's meant to be like a Cameron or Blair surrogate, but of that type, the Blairite.
Well, there's not much difference between Blair and Cameron, really.
Yeah, he called himself the heir to Blair, didn't he, David
Cameron?
Yeah. So it's that sort of figure, and things reach something of a climax politically, and King Charles III enters Parliament. Now, we should say the reason why that's significant, if you don't already know, is that Charles I entered Parliament on the 5th of January 1642, and he did so because he thought that members of Parliament were going to arrest his wife, or try his wife. Mm-hmm. She was French, she was Gaelic. He storms Parliament. He realises very, very quickly that those 5 members, they were called, aren't there, and he says, it seems like my birds have flown, and he leaves. And this is what starts the English Civil War, that a previous Charles I, storms Parliament. And it's the reason why now, even today, the monarch never enters the House of Commons. He only, or she, speaks from the House of Lords, the state address, opening of Parliament. So for him to enter Parliament is pregnant with historical symbolism, but also, of course, the moment when he's...
And being called Charles.
He's being, yes, indeed. So I'll play it, and me and Aaron will have to bear with this on YouTube on my teeny little phone, but I'll edit it in later, so you'll hear it nice and crisp, God willing.
We will divide the House and vote. Ayes to the left. Empowered by ancient decree, I do, as King of... use my royal prerogative here to dissolve the Parliament at once. Silence! This noise demeans you all. Through petty theft and fighting here amongst yourselves, you've lost the population's trust. I am not prone to certainty, but you have drawn that measure. Unlike you all, I'm born and raised to rule. I do not choose. But like an Albion oak, I'm sown in British soil and grown, not for myself, but reared with single purpose meant. My cells and organs constitute this land. My speaker, will you here confirm to them that what I do is well within my right and anointed power to, as king, demand.
Your Majesty, if this is what you want, then this you can, as king, command.
There we go. Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how you, I hadn't heard that before. You showed that to me the other day because it represented my fleeting thought, and I was like, okay, well, so someone has thought this. And when I hear that again with the nice melodic music in the background, anthemic, it just brings up a lot of things into focus that you're not normally allowed to think. And I think people, given that this is now post-COVID, we're 5 years on from that manic time, which was the unruffling of so many feathers and the apocalypse, the revealing of so much that had been uncovered, or that had been covered up. It's opened up a lot of, people are now allowed to think unthinkable thoughts. And that's my latest unthinkable thought. And I don't even know where it would entirely go. Of course, there's people who are listening to go, it's a ridiculous thought even to contemplate. Well, yeah, I'm sure it is a bit ridiculous, but it's almost a thought experiment to go, why do we naturally inherit this way of thinking that back then, when you had kings who could act like kings, it was always worse? Like, it's just obviously worse. Like, I can't even hear any other debate on it. It's just obviously worse because we know that a king could be a tyrant. Yes, of course. But can a democracy be a tyrant? Can a people become tyrannical? Can a people become ideologically completely brainwashed by the likes of James O'Brien? Yes. And do they then vote for people? And are they educated in schools and in universities with ideology to the extent where democracy becomes far more demonic and tyrannical than a king could be, who of course is fallen, yes, and prone to sin like any of us. But as the fictional King Charles III said in that speech, raised to rule, raised from the very earliest. Like so George, Prince George, now William, who's the current heir to the throne, his son George, from the very earliest age, knows that he'll be raised to rule one day, and so he's raised with a certain sense of nobility. He's educated to that end. He's educated in his country's history more than any other, presumably not more though, but at least to a particular extent. I presume a monarch is educated in a particularly unique way that is different to anyone else's education. So maybe they don't know more about British history, but they know far more about British history than the average British person. They have to. And they have to embody that. They have to know that they're part of that. They don't get a choice. That's why we even as a public, we loathe Harry, basically, because he said, I can just exit it. I'll become a postmodern individualist and I'll exit myself from the royal family because I don't want to put myself in. I want to be an individual. And he thinks that will win the younger people to him. But most of the people who know about these things go, no, we loathe that. We actually want a king or a monarch who actually, like Queen Elizabeth II did, who does genuinely embody that and takes that duty and that role seriously. So you just look at that and you go, have we progressed? I mean, on many ways, of course, progression is possible in society. Yeah, of course, there are things that are better about our society than there were in King Charles I's time, for sure. But are there things that are far worse? Yes, absolutely. We've just passed 2 ridiculous bills that allow you to kill unborn children and the non-useful elderly in Great Britain. Mm-hmm. So, and we passed that, like in Parliament. That's supposed to be the safe place that stops you from making those kind of ludicrous decisions. So,
yeah, I agree. Yeah, there was a whole literature, by the way, called Specula Principum, I think it was called, the Mirror of Princes. So a whole body of literature that was designed to be like the mirror that you would put up to a prince, which was designed to train them in the way they should go in terms of monarchy. And yes, that was a deliberate allusion to the Book of Proverbs, because this is something many Christians don't see, which is that the Book of Proverbs is a Specula Principum.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
And so when you see when many Christians appeal to the Book of Proverbs and many do, especially in the liberal evangelical wing, and they say things like, look, it's defending the orphan. It's like, yes, it's Solomon telling his son to be a good king and to defend the orphan, to defend the widow, to do that which... And it becomes really obvious later on in the chapters, because it's talking about, later on, especially in Proverbs, 30, 31 sort of thing, 4 things I do not understand.
Yeah.
And in one of those sorts of lists, you get that a king should be like one of the people, that they should be given to too much wine, that they should. And like, what do you do with that? When if all you think of the Book of Proverbs is that it's just a list of ditty little sayings for ordinary Christians. Hear me out. Of course, by the Holy Spirit's inspiration, it is useful for ordinary believers. Yeah. But what I mean is, in its intention, you're like, what do you do with this? Yeah. And in its intention, it makes sense, because it's Solomon teaching his son to be wise, and by extension, it's a specular principle. Yeah. It's an example of raising for princes. And it's exactly what you're saying. Now, would I want an absolute monarch like the Sun King of France or something? Well, not necessarily. I like constitutional monarchy. I think it's a good system. And I think, Cicero, when he writes politically, he advocates for it. This idea of a balanced monarchy that is balanced, that is by aristocracy and by the will of the people to some extent. But one thing that the ancient political writers are almost unanimous on, it's the dangers of democracy, of mob rule. And really all that, it's really interesting actually. You're right, you were saying it, you were alluding to it earlier, which is that we might object to the idea of aristocracy, yet we have it still. You cannot avoid aristocracy because men are differentiated. And some men are more excellent than others in certain things. Some men are given more to rule than others. Some men are gifted in other ways. Some men are excellent and outstanding, and some are knaves and cards and curs and all this old-fashioned language, and are basically just not very good people, and shouldn't be put in positions of power. My point is that you're always going to get some who excel, and it just so happens that now this is the argument, isn't it? That if we just turn into a republic tomorrow, you wouldn't have kings, but you'd have President Blair or something. That's Hitchens' point. But I think we see the proof of that point now amongst us, that we have effectively abolished the aristocracy for all intents and purposes, and look what's happened. Is it for the better? Well, we still have aristocrats ruling us. They're just CEOs and
plutocrats, or
technocrats, managers, bureaucrats. That sort of caliber.
So Humphreys from Yes Men.
Yeah, exactly. And some of them might be brill, a bit like Dyson, who invents really good Hoovers. And you get some idea, it's fairly decent bloke. But then some are going to be less brill. I was reading today about I'm not saying personally, I'm not meaning to impugn him at all personally, but you get the rather disappointing, underwhelming architectural designs of the guy who invented the Shard and is now being given commission. Have you seen this? Commission to design the Queen Elizabeth II Park in James's Park. Oh, dear. So
it was sad that Roger Scruton. I mean, he died a couple of years ago now, but it was amazing that he was invited onto the architectural commission at some point to be an advisor, but then because he had made some comments about trans, he was struck off there. And,
they also lied about him, didn't they? And all sorts of stuff that Douglas Murray exposed.
But he was a great advocate of this grandeur and architecture, and I don't know what his views are. Presumably he's a constitutional monarchist, but he was I've been reading his book England and Elegy recently, which is an amazing book.
This is one of the things where we as English people, and look, we have to keep this grounded, of course we do, in biblical thought, but this is why, as English people, though, we have to be careful, because it isn't in the English tradition, properly speaking, not since the Reformation, to have an absolute monarch. Henry VIII was the most absolute monarch perhaps we've ever had, since the English Reformation, certainly, we have had this constitutional monarchy come in more and more. And it's really, when sometimes we reach towards the absolute monarch model, we're still thinking, even if we don't aware of it, we're still thinking in French Enlightenment terms, French post-revolutionary terms. So, like Joseph de Maistre was an anti-revolutionary French author who advocated, in reaction against the revolution, for absolute monarchy. Right. The English tradition is constitutional monarchy, which is a monarch like King George I or King George II, III, IV, etc., who is balanced by his House of Commons, and the particular circumstances of English history mean that monarch is that it's almost like a constant push and shove between House of Commons and monarchy. But the difference is that up until really the 19th century, there was extreme reverence for the king.
Yeah.
Pubs would have images of the king in the lounges, and ordinary people would have images of the king in their homes, and the image of the king was on their banknotes and on their coins, and there would be profound sadness when the king died, and profound elation when a new one was coronated, and it just because there were checks and balances, it didn't mean that there was what's the right way of putting it? Like a diminution of respect.
Authority, I guess.
Of authority, yeah.
But isn't the difference, this is the thing, I think there should be a new word for what we have, because we now have a sort of, there needs to be a new term. There's a difference between our constitutional monarchy today and, let's say, King George III or something, because I think it does really feel like it's a tourism now. It's basically a tourist attraction.
You know, the greatest expression of what you just said is, again, the coronation routine. So, I mean, there was a bit of debate, although it wasn't very loud at the time of Charles III's coronation. But historically, what has happened, even up until really Queen Elizabeth II's, is you would have all the lords gathered around in Westminster Abbey, and they would all of them be wearing their own crowns. Oh my word! Again, the word is on the tip of my tongue. They would each of them be wearing their own crowns, and at the time of the coronation, you'd see all of the House of Lords taking off their crowns, and as it were, paying homage to the. That's why in the coronation routine you have a speaker saying, speaking to the west, speaking to the north, speaking to the south, speaking to the east. And saying, is this your undoubted king? And they cry, God save the king. So the great expression of the difference between what it is now and then is that didn't happen in didn't happen in Elizabeth II. It certainly didn't happen in Charles III's. In fact, in place of the lords, who had a right historically to come in horse and carriage with their swords and all that sort of stuff, they would, you would have a very almost post-Blairite people of the nation who would come and take their place. A new aristocracy, literally exemplified in the middle of Westminster.
But without the nobility.
But without the nobility, without the virtue.
Yeah.
And without the profound connection to the land, to the faith, to the country.
And of course, the thing not to miss in this is people go, yeah, but why aren't these new people that are in the new coronation, whether they're celebrities or whatever, some people that they've decided, it's been decided for DEI reasons or whatever, these are people of the nation. Well, aren't they just as likely to sin or go wrong or be unvirtuous as the aristocrat? Well, yeah, but the difference is the aristocrat and the nobility have nobility as the standard. What we've done is we've actually reduced the standard. So we don't actually. So if somebody goes wrong, we've actually lowered it. So that's why even the royals are kind of not even up to any standard anymore. Like in so many, Prince Andrew, Prince Harry, there's so many embarrassing things about the royal family over the last 40, 50 years. Yeah. The Crown dramatises that, obviously, but it doesn't even need to dramatise it that much because the life itself is that the standards have dropped for everyone, including for how we hold. I think we mentioned this on a previous episode, on the way that our politicians, technically, the Prime Minister has more authority than the King by a long, long, long way. I understand why that you need to have a first among equals, you need to have a leader, but isn't that interesting that he just doesn't get treated as with the same level of nobility and honour as you should treat your leaders? To
some extent, I suppose that's a good thing in that we can chuck out the Prime Minister.
That is exactly.
It's a check and balance that we can, all our political anger can be directed at a Prime Minister who has to come back to the country once every 4 years, 5 years, whereas the King is separate from that. But you're right, though. I mean, we have to say, God save the King. But Charles, by the grace of God, you can't continue the way you're doing and speaking the way you're speaking. And this is we're not carrying water in every respect for Charles III here. He is our king, and we wish for his salvation. We will sing "God Save the King," and yet he has overseen. What's the way of putting it? He's overseen a deteriation, really, in the quality of people and in the household.
But arguably, the Queen Elizabeth, who I was great. I loved Queen Elizabeth II, but she did oversee. But she had no power to do anything about it. She didn't even have the same power. And it's always soft power, of course, in a constitutional monarchy. But Victoria seemed to exert more influence over Britain, and symbolically, even than Elizabeth.
Yeah, and Elizabeth, this is. Again, David Starkey is sometimes talked in these terms. And this is where we as English people go very, very tentatively and we go very, very carefully. Because we love our monarchs and we love Queen Elizabeth II. But she wasn't a perfect woman, and now I believe she's in glory. We confess that she wasn't a perfect woman. But the reality is that whether she intended this or not, but this talk of I'm, in public service, which was very honourable and noble in itself, this notion of self-sacrifice, it was rooted in that tradition. But did you notice that when Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, he picked up that language? I'm a public servant. I do this for the duty of the public service. He used the same language as Queen Elizabeth II. It allowed for this sort of... a
regal air.
A regal air, kind of, but unimpressive at the same time.
Yeah.
So, this is the state of things now.
Yeah.
And with regard to these two bills that have been passed recently, I think it would be a wonderful thing if the King actually broke some constitutional, stepped on some constitutional eggshells.
Because there's
some precedents.
And the reason I brought it up is just to say, there has to be a breaking point where the King goes, I'm the King of England, the government is doing things that are not English, or whatever I believe England ought to stand for. Now, I know that there are, I'm not talking about micromanaging, I'm talking about massive issues of life and death like this. It's just an interesting thought experiment to go you don't want an absolute monarchy. But you could at least have a more empowered monarchy, so that it meant more. Because we're all playing along with this ludicrous, nonsense. Otherwise, really, and it does help the nation having a monarchy, but it's still, it's so disempowered that it becomes a bit of a joke.
Yeah, it's the motto certainly of Elizabeth's household, wasn't it? Never complain, never explain. And not really to make they're not designed, they're trained not to make constitutional interventions. Yeah. Because it's so unconstitutional. Yes, we do have a constitution, it's just now is not written in the same way as the Americans is. But we do have a Bill of Rights, and again, it allows pistols. But anyway, it's not really in keeping. It would be massively unconstitutional. For him to enter the House of Commons, I don't think I'm quite in favour of that. But I think he could do something though.
Yeah, we're not talking about dissolving Parliament.
Yeah, that would be mental. I don't think he's even allowed now since David Cameron, since they removed the royal prerogative. But for him to make some sort of intervention, you would think would be a good thing. But then you start to wonder, how much of this does he agree with?
Of course. Yeah, to be honest, in Charles's case, I wouldn't have much hope anyway. But
if you imagine Prince George, in line with what we've seen recently in
reading Proverbs.
He's reading Proverbs. But no, seriously, imagine if, in line with that Gen Z revival that has been talked about, the silent revival, imagine he gets touched by that. And imagine, because I don't think that William is a Christian at all. God bless him. God save him. But I don't think he is. He's as woke as the rest of them. So
did you hear him talk about when they asked him, would you... it was the most spineless answer. It was they asked him it was at some LGBT pride thing a couple of years ago, and he was there doing his, this is so great. And they said, so would you be happy if your son came out as gay? Which is interesting for someone could we have a gay king? Kind of thing. And you know that presents a problem, because you know that even if he's pro-LGBT, he's not that pro-LGBT that he can possibly think this is a great thing. But he does say, it would be great. I would be really happy for him. But the only thing is, the reason it would be a problem, the reason I wouldn't wish that upon him, is because of all of the abuse he'd get. And I was like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, all of that abuse that LGBT people get, the prince would just get totally ravaged by that, wouldn't he?
Into that sort of therapeutic culture that is so prevalent now. No, but I don't think he's a Christian. Who knows? But I don't think he is. The Lord does. But no, imagine that Prince George, he gets caught by this sort of Gen Z revival of interest in Christianity, and he is an actual convicted believer by the time he becomes king, sometime, in the next 40-something years. Yeah. And imagine that then. What would happen if you're an actual king in that situation? Yeah, that sort of king, you'd want to see making some interventions, but... one assumes society would have changed by then, I guess.
Yeah. But you imagine if the public had a different appetite in 20 years' time, whether something could change. I don't know. It's just an interesting thought.
You get the feeling, don't you? Sorry to go back to the actual bills, but you get the feeling that they were rushing some of this in.
Yes, definitely.
Because of the change thing. They know for a fact that actually it is not at all guaranteed that they're going to be in Parliament in 3.5 years' time.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's genuinely possible that by the next Parliament that we will have reacted against this. Especially, not to get into the weeds with it, but especially on the euthanasia one. Yeah. Once the public see how awful this is going to be, and I don't just mean deaths of people, though that is awful, but it's not going to be able to be managed well. We don't have the ability. The effect on the hospice system, the number of hospices that are going to have to close, which are already offering end-of-life care that is strained to begin with financially, but they're going to have to close because there's not... Did you notice that Ledbetter and others one of the proponents of the bill, was trying to suggest that you couldn't really have an opt-out of this. If you're a hospice, you can't opt out of this.
Oh, I didn't notice that, no.
You can't opt out. This is Dan Hitchens is great. You know, he should be given a medal for the reporting he's been doing. Wow. Dan Hitchens, Peter's son. But yeah, there's all sorts of stuff here that will cause major problems. There's not even a guarantee logistically that it's possible. So it had to be. Didn't they originally say as a safeguard that not only that, but they would have to have a high court magistrate and a court of a company of psychiatrists. So all these psychiatrists already have run off their feet to try and have many of the patients on the NHS and elsewhere, and all these magistrates with a massive court backlog.
But then they've appealed that. I think they took away.
So that's what I mean.
They made it easier.
So it's now easier. There are fewer checks and balances.
Yeah.
The hospice system will begin to creak and hopefully not collapse, but it certainly will suffer. I do wonder whether or not in 5 years or so the public, which are already not like massively enthusiastic, I think the recent polling is 7 out of 10 support for it. It really does depend on the question you ask. Yeah. So you can easily see that swinging back around.
And it's just about normative morality for me. I just think it's what it changes to how you think about the sanctity of life across a society. If it's possible to press a button to opt in or opt out of life, and to on the behalf of somebody else at the unborn stage, opt them in or out of life because of their inconvenience. But at both levels, it's like the inconvenience of life, and we can disdain to tamper with that. And I even spoke to an NHS doctor recently, who was saying, it may come to them, because even those who are specialists in certain areas, where it might, like those who are dealing with neck cancer or something, would be an area that comes into his one. And he's like, he doesn't know what they would do in that situation. It's not something that he would want. He doesn't know if there'll be he assumes there'll be an opt-out for people in terms of administering this. But that's the whole thing. Who administers it? Well, I mean, okay, we are going into the weeds a bit.
And also you get the, this is Doug Wilson's point on like reparations and stuff. That with this system, like any time the government deigns to get involved, to use your word, in situations like this, well, suddenly you get a whole middle management class.
Exactly.
So can you imagine the companies that are going to be set up to manage this? And then the people that talk about products. The products of those systems will be certain kinds of people. Yeah. So do you really want to meet someone who has chosen to make it their lifetime's work to go around like with drugs and with
efficiently to do it well?
I think it's a good idea and do it as their matter of course, to see it day in, day out. And do you really want to meet those technocrats? Do you really want to meet? I don't. It's
Eichmannian, as it were. It's literally like that was the whole thing about Eichmann. Yeah. In terms of the administrator of the Holocaust, and Hannah Arendt's sort of critique of him as being someone who, the banality of evil, the sense that he didn't think he'd done anything wrong because he was just doing his job. He was an administrator. Yes, he happened to be dealing with numbers of how many people are being killed. And it was decided by politicians above his head, he would say, so it does something to a human soul to do that. And you think there's so many moral issues that there's an absolute idiocy, which is exactly why the House of Lords is supposed to be there as the moral conscience. And if you had decent bishops, I don't trust it. I don't know precisely which ones have influence in the Church of England. There are still some good people in the Church of England, but I don't trust the bishops in the House of Lords to do anything.
I was thinking this, we mentioned before about reparations. Okay, well, that's loosely connected to the Black Lives Matter thing, and why is that relevant? Because I remember in 2020, because I lived in Chester at the time. You'd moved away from Chester not too long before, but I think it must have been at least 20 churches across Chester signing a letter in favour of Black Lives Matter. It now seems incredibly foolish on its own terms. But do you think those 20 churches are going to be signing a letter against anything that's happened in the last week? Do you think those 20 churches, which included many Anglican churches, do you think they're going to be signing a letter anytime soon? Do you think your town, listener, do you think your town's churches are going to sign a letter together against this? Do you think that's going to happen? You can jog on. I've got a bridge to sell you. Yeah. That's the sadness here, that there are some, such as yourself, Aaron, who was down there protesting, such as here at Watchorn, such as others across the country, who are actually saying something. But we're few and far between. And as you say, until the church as a whole stands up and actually says something and is willing to be made to look foolish, because this is the socially acceptable position of modern society. This is the dinner chat. This is the dinner chat class. Until the church is willing to stand up against this, as you say, very little can be done.
And many people I spoke to, by the way, at the rally had similar stories that I've heard all over the place. Everywhere I go to speak at places or whatever, I will hear people who are usually not a leader in their church. Occasionally, it's really good to meet pastors who really care about these issues and are preaching, and I don't mean taking over the pulpit with social issues. We're not talking about that. We're talking about just being aware of the cultural issues and how can you steward and shepherd your people in such a way that they are aware of the mission that they're engaged in as the church. The public witness of the church is a thing. Jesus said to be a city on a hill, a light, not putting a light under a bushel, as it were, being salt and light in a community. And in your nation as well. No one thinks nationally anymore. So pastors kind of think, I haven't got time to think like that. But as I said, helpfully, could have a link to Ryan Clark's sermon on righteousness exalting a nation from Proverbs again, from that for princes. This is something that loads of people they have some influence in their church, or maybe they're just someone sitting in the pew. They can't do much. They feel completely powerless, and they might send an email to their elders or their pastor and go, hey, this thing's happening. Could you pray about it at the prayer meeting? And they'll be like, well, if we pray about this, you'll have to pray about that as well. And that's like, yeah, fine. Maybe you should pray about these other things as well. Or maybe you don't have to pray about every person's interesting social issue. Maybe you just think and pray about whether this actually is a significant moral issue that a church ought to be caring about and getting active in, especially on the pro-life thing in general. I mean, these in a way, these are both pro-life issues, assisted dying and abortion, of course. But I think that the abortion issue is an even more obvious one in the sense of it's like they're equatable, I guess, in terms of murder, in what we're doing in terms of the sanctity of life. But there is a sense in which people need to be thinking about abolishing abortion. How do we go about that? How can pro-life groups get together and not be this thing where the activists are over here and the churches are like, oh yeah, I'll one or two of my people maybe give you a bit of money a month. But really for churches to galvanise behind this as a movement and unite, which is a very hard thing to do, because you may have to have cessationists and tongue-praying Pentecostals together and Orthodox people who might not even think you're a Christian half the time or whatever. And that's part of the issue, but we've not had that kind of unity. We've not had the church kind of waking up to that. We've got to kind of come into land at some point very soon. I wanted to play quickly a clip because we're talking about waking up the church and the compromise of the church. And in our last episode, we mentioned briefly, I think, talking about reaching the patriotic, so I wouldn't even say the working class. Yes, sure, they're going to be mainly working class, maybe, but it's increasingly not the case. It's just that, as I said, the king should be the most patriotic person, but whether he is or not. Of course, there is a growing amount of people who are patriotic and who are pro-Christian. And Tommy Robinson, we mentioned, who many, safe centrist Christians would be loath to have any association with because he swears or because he is a bit rough around the edges. Now, he's increasingly pro-Christian. I don't think he's necessarily a Christian yet, but it's interesting to hear him talk about it. So this clip came to my wife showed me this clip the other day, and it's interesting. And he mentioned a friend of mine who we'll be actually interviewing next on the podcast. So we'll play this now. This is Tommy Robinson speaking on a podcast recently about Christianity.
Hope, patriotism, everything, love, it was there. And I looked at it, and that has coincided at the same time, that feeling, with what I'd say is a revival of Christianity in the UK. I've seen that. It's hard to explain. It was the first demonstration in I think the mention of God turns a lot of people off. That's what I feel. In the UK, I think.
Well, it does. I can tell you by the analytics, anytime I interview somebody, during the process of the interview, as soon as someone starts mentioning God, Christ, Jesus, the analytics takes a dip. People are switched off to it.
Well, don't switch off to this, because when I watched, it was the Paris Olympics, and the opening ceremony was satanic. And it was a total attack on Christianity and the core beliefs of Christianity and Jesus. It was disgusting. And if someone who wasn't out to defend Christianity at every point, I watched it and just thought, that's done my head in watching that. They would not do that for Islam or Muhammad. They wouldn't mock in such a way at the opening ceremony. Why have they done that? So then we went to the first event, and I gave the microphone to Speaker's Corner Bob, because I knew he was a masculine Christian, and I wanted to counter what I'd seen. And I saw the public's reception to him, and then I saw someone holding a banner saying Christ is King, as everyone marched past, and I saw the crowds cheering, and I thought, wow. And then we had Trafalgar Square, and there must be 100,000 people chanting Christ is King. I'm thinking, something's happening here. Something big is happening here. And I think that if you look at when I look now, and I met a brilliant pastor in jail. He was fabulous. For too long, I've met Christian leaders in prison and just thought, no wonder your church is empty. Yeah.
Too weak.
Weak. Cowards. The Christian church, what's it known for now in the UK? What, flying rainbow flags? Give us a break. Yeah? Of course no one's in your church, right? Christianity would not be here now if it wasn't weak and pathetic as many of these leaders have made it. Yeah? I believe that the church has been infiltrated. But I look at what's happening with Christianity in America. I look at some of their priests and pastors talk. But I looked at something that was happening. And the statistics now show something that's happening. And I think it's happening because... And I went through the Bible. I had Bible studies. That's the one thing I had on a Monday. I had 45 minutes with the pastor, personally. He was an Asian pastor, lovely man, great man. And I had individual meetings with him. And as I went through the Bible, which I've never done, I've gone through the Quran before. I've wrote my own Quran before I've gone through the Bible. And as I went through it, I realised everything is from the Bible. Every saying, everything. Every part of what our country has been built has come from the Bible. So to people who don't even believe in the story of Jesus or have that belief, it's that's built the culture of Great Britain. That is the reason this country has become such a beautiful nation. And when did this country start to fall? When did it decay? When it lost its faith and identity. And I believe the church are partly responsible for that. So I don't think people leaving church, I think the church is partly responsible for that. They've been a joke. But I think that something huge has been happening at our events.
Yeah, so I don't know what your response to that is, but it's quite amazing to hear Tommy Robinson, demonised by so many, speaking like that, speaking with more clarity on those cultural issues than quite a lot of Christian leaders have been willing to, haven't they, in recent years?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, and would you find any church person who would be talking like that? Any church leader, I should say, any normal, publicly known church leader? I don't think so. It is amazing. It's amazing that he's had that pastor as well.
Yeah.
Good on that pastor. And specifically, I was thinking most pastors, if they met Tommy... First of all, I don't know why he's in jail, but praise the Lord. Hopefully there's forgiveness and he's repented of the reason why he's in jail. But isn't it amazing? Because a lot of pastors wouldn't even give Tommy Robinson the time of day. They wouldn't lead a Bible study with him. They wouldn't even talk to him. They wouldn't want to be seen with him. They wouldn't... and yet this pastor presumably has gone... and it's really interesting that he's an Asian. By that, obviously, in British vernacular, that means Pakistani, not someone from Japan or something. Yeah. So even though that's commonly, people would say that's the exact type of person who Tommy Robinson would be racist against, clearly not in this instance. And so that's really interesting. This person who potentially might be feeling, Tommy Robinson has said things against my ethnic group, and yet he's willing to sit down with him and open the scriptures with him, and do so faithfully in prison. And look at the result. When the word does the work, look what happens. And it's already, he's seeing things. So praise the Lord. I don't think he's necessarily a Christian. I haven't heard enough to say that. But it would certainly suggest he's on his way, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that awareness, things that we've talked about many times, of the awareness of the fall of Christendom. So many people have been saying this in so many different ways. But there's something that is uniting people at the moment on these issues where they see the crumbling. He used the example of the Paris Olympics. That has been a watershed moment for many. When people see the desecration of the Last Supper,
and there's so many Christians at the time were defending that.
I know,
so many, even ones I knew, who were saying that it isn't what you think. It's just they wanted to take a swipe at. Again, it's like the James O'Brien thing. They wanted to take a swipe at the stupid man from Rotherham, as it were, the stupid Christian fundamentalists. Yeah. They want to be the clever ones who get approval. And even when you go, but even what you're saying there, yes, there was this painter, and yes, it was actually of this scene, and yes, it was of Dionysius or something. Yeah. But clearly that halo effect is Christian. Clearly that was an imitation of the Last Supper. Clearly it wasn't. And they don't really hear what you're saying. They don't want to hear it. They want to be clever. Yeah, they want to be clever.
And it's different to, let's say, I don't know how you and I will have talked about this, as students, in trying to be cool evangelicals who want to reach the culture. We don't want to sound like Westboro Baptist Church, etc. So we would always be like, I can't believe Christians once protested against Jesus Christ Superstar or something. When that musical came out in the 70s or whatever. And you've had Christians historically who've protested against the Beatles, etc. And we've kind of thought, that's just kind of prudish people. Now, I don't know if I would agree with all those people necessarily. I haven't met them. But when we see it now, I think it's coming into clearer and sharper focus when you see directly anti-Christian things at a time of the fall of Christian civilization, which we've been witnessing for over 100 years. But it's like you're
it's the Mary Whitehouse, isn't it? That's the Mary Whitehouse. And you kind of go, as you say, sharper, clearer focus. Or maybe she was seeing things in wholes, not in bits and pieces. Maybe she was seeing... you do see these memes going around, and it said every single moral panic since the 1960s is actually correct. And so like under Dungeons and Dragons and Harry Potter and whatever. Yeah. And I don't think I'd go with them at all in all respects, but you can kind of see what they're saying, which is actually maybe there was something they were seeing that we are not seeing, and because we've just become so accustomed and acclimatized to the subjects in question, well, how stupid. But actually, maybe there was something, and can you name us? Thinking about the evangelicals who want to be cool and who would want to be seen to not be like Tommy Robinson, to not be like the caller from Rotherham. Can you think of a single evangelical leader, I'm just thinking this now, who actually has succeeded in being cool? Can you think of a single one? So every single one that I can think of, like Nadia Weber or whatever her name was, that Lutheran pastor from the States, has gone off the deep end of feminism and heresy. Okay. Right. So I can think of pastors who have tried to be cool, but in the process lost their faith. Like
Steve Chalk, who's kind of
Steve Chalk. This is what I mean. Who have actually denied evangelicalism in order to become cool. Yeah. Okay, fine. But all the examples I can think of, like the best example I can think of most recently is Mr. Rogers, from the States. The children's presenter, he's dead now.
Okay.
But and the likes of like Neil Armstrong, who I understand was a Presbyterian, who have made massive cultural impact, but not of this age, not in this generation. Yeah. They made massive cultural impact because they lived in a time that respected their faith. What Aaron Wren would call the positive world, Yeah. But I can't think of a single person, a single evangelical leader, certainly not in the last 10 years, 15 years, who, in trying to be cool, has actually achieved that result without abandoning their faith. I can't think of a single one. And so what I'm saying is, it's a fruitless endeavour. Yeah. It's completely fruitless. You're only just going to end up either losing your faith or sounding like a wally. Yeah. Like you sound silly when you're trying to be cool and trying to win the favour, because you're not going to get their favour. They think you're stupid.
And specifically, in terms of that being cool, meaning pallying up to the zeitgeist, deliberately putting on a certain air in order to reach people. Now, of course, people could say the same to reach the new patriotic right wing. They could say, okay, right, the next cool... You can tell it probably will happen at some point. Someone's going to try and put it on, try and pretend that they can reach some people in order to reach them in some way. We're not talking about doing that. We're not talking about like Hudson Taylor dressing like a Chinese man to reach Chinese people as a kind of aesthetic. I mean that this trying to be cool became more ideological. It became more, how can I embrace the ideas you embrace? Not even embracing the rhetoric you embrace, the ideas, the fundamental foundations. And this is a huge problem, with the whole Tim Keller model, the whole, how can I diagonalize to the other culture, but can I only do it to the left and never to the right? And always seem like I'm the perfect centrist, but never reaching someone like Tommy Robinson. And all along, there's a whole part of the population of Britain and in other Western nations who've been crying out for a clear, moral, noble voices of nobility, those who could lead them, like they might have, like they look to their king to lead them, like soldiers have gone to war for king and country historically. That couldn't really mean anything. If we were in a war today, we wouldn't really want to use that language. I don't think a soldier would even... They're even talking about having to give soldiers in Britain £10,000 just to sign up. I mean, imagine that. The days of like the kind of what do they call them? The gang.
Oh, the Pals Battalions.
Yeah, the ones who wouldn't have previously, where they'd have to go into press gangs, going into pubs to get people to force them to sign up. Almost now they're kind of desperately wanting them because there's such a lack of patriotism. But you've got people here recognizing, like Tommy Robinson, recognizing an inherent connection between the nation of Britain that they love and Christianity. Now, they're not Christians, but they see that connection. They see that Christendom really matters, and we need to do something about it. We just speak into them. So
this is the great sadness, isn't it? That actually, we can say yes, we can make a parallel between Christians trying to be more rightist in their politics to appeal to rightists, and Christians becoming more leftist in order to appeal to leftists. The difference is that right-leaning politics, I would say, are genetically Christian, insofar as conservatism has many points of substantial overlap with Christianity, whereas leftist politics, there is no overlap. It is totally genetically incoherent with Christianity.
And you can say that recognising there can be corruptions of that.
Of course. But this is what I mean. It's the strange thing is that many evangelicals will put on the airs and graces of a leftist, because secretly they are actually a leftist. Yeah. That's why they're doing it. Let's be honest. It's not I've become all things for all people. But they're doing it, and their cant, their rationale is, I want to reach out to leftists, when actually right there at their doorstep are, let's face it, probably a silent majority of people who are conservatively leaning, and if they just made any attempt whatsoever to reach out to them, even just in a rightist frame, a conservative frame, you're going to end up with a harvest, because there is a genetic coherence between what the Christians are saying and what the general conservative mind would lean towards. Now, is that always the case? No. Does it still require the Spirit of God to regenerate a heart? Yes, of course. We're not saying that you can somehow get into the soul through Tommy Robinson. That's bonkers. But what we're saying is that the folly of the last few decades of evangelicalism, appealing to the left and wanting to be seen as respectable to a leftist audience that hates them, by ignoring a conservative demographic that they think are stupid but actually would agree with them in more respect. And that would have a better chance of, if they happen to ally with them, it would have a better chance of achieving what they want. Yeah,
and in the long run, it's not going to serve them well. So even if they try and jump on the train late, they'll see if they're doing it for the wrong motives, it's going to fall apart. But if they just stood, they've been shamelessly biblical, and the phrase I like to reuse a lot, they'd be standing on the rock, and the storms come. The storms of the last 5 years, the sweeping change of the nation, the vibe shift, even the political things. Political votes we've been talking about in this episode, which have gone against that vibe shift in a more liberal direction, a more godless direction. Actually, that will probably, I believe, will serve the purpose providentially to push us further to the right, because people are going to go, that is just ridiculous. I'm animated to action in a way that I wasn't before, and if you see people getting hold of that and going, yeah, we can actually re-earth things that were covered up, that the pietistic Christianity covered up by saying neither right nor left, but we're all really secretly a bit left. And therefore, if you want to think things to the right, that's your prerogative. It's completely, God has no opinion on it. Well, actually, go and read your Bibles. He may have opinions on things like this. There are opinions on the sanctity of life. There are even opinions on authority and how that's to be shaped, even of difference within society, as well as the things that would seem to be left-leaning as well, of course. Yeah, of course there is... there's a care for the poor and a care for the oppressed, which the left likes to take as its own special invention. But actually, no, you can actually, to be fully shamelessly biblical, of course, you cannot care about how someone further right will think of you if they might be only formed in a certain way that they can't possibly think of a social conscience. Well, then you've got to show them that they're not even properly conservative.
Yeah, and the left want to help the poor by giving them the state,
well, exactly, that's
rather than giving them actual help.
Exactly, it's not really a love. So anyway, we're drawing to a close now. There's so much we've covered there, tried to cram into a short space of time. But if you're interested in those things, of course, do tune in to the next episode where of course, Tommy Robinson in that clip did mention Speaker's Corner Bob, or otherwise known as Bob the Builder to some, who I met up with recently in London, and will be having a chinwag about how to dethrone the secular kings of our time, the secular aristocracy, secularism in place of Christ as the king, the one who, of course, Bob himself was chanting and getting 100,000 people at Trafalgar Square to chant, whether they knew what they were chanting or not. But there's something to work with there. Some of you will be listening to this worrying about nominalism, worrying about people chanting Christ as king when he's not really their king. Well, I think we converted the Vikings that way, and it kind of there are things to mine there, there are things to talk about. We of course want to see people believing in their hearts and confessing with their mouth that Christ is Lord. We want that to be real. We don't want it to be a fake thing. But nonetheless, righteousness exalts a nation. There are things that are embedded in this nation which are good for that nation when we proclaim Christ clearly and indeed loudly. There's a lot of talk about the quiet revival at the moment, but this actually could be a louder revival than people have actually thought might be the case. So, on that note, farewell from me and from Nathan, and be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Defy the devil and act like men. Love the brotherhood, fear God, Christ is Lord, God save the King.
Amen.